and YouTube, Therapy Cable, LinkedIn, Instagram, and a few other social media. Welcome to our weekly discussion every Thursday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Pacific Daytime. We hold this conversation, this presentation about personality disorder. So today, what I would like to talk about is specifically borderline personality disorder and basically how family members can do something about borderline personality traits and characteristics and full-blown disorder if one of your family members is suffering from that. So, in fact, I have received about 2 or 3 questions regarding this particular issue that I would like to address today. These are good examples. Without naming the person, we want to keep the individuals who are providing these questions anonymous and confidential. So, but in general, that can really happen in any family. So one of the questions and the situation is such that a mother has reported she has been kind of cut off from her son. Her son mostly is suffering from borderline personality disorder and is even seeking therapy. However, even despite going to a therapist, the relationship between him and his mother and parents, basically, not just the mother and father, have been strained and conflictual to the point that now the son is really just completely cutting off the family, mostly the parents, and has a hard time to really reconnect with them or allowing them back into his life. And the parents are suffering, son is suffering, everybody is suffering. And the parents are in touch with their second son, so the first son's brother, as well as the first son's wife. And they also hear from the wife and from the second son that, how their first son is suffering and not happy really about the separation, but really that is what he sees as the best solution at this time to ease his pain. But so it's a very heart-wrenching situation where the mother has reached out to me and basically asked, what should I do? Should I push even further to repair the relationship, to somehow get the family back together, to somehow remain in my son's life? And at the same time, she knows, she has come to understand the particular dynamics that have led to this situation. So she had shared with me how in the past she and her husband were not really aware of these issues with the borderline personality disorder. So they, in their ignorance, more or less, or lack of information about what to do, what to say, they had engaged in very kind of a conflictual, very kind of a almost argumentative and very not almost, but very argumentative and acrimonious, adversarial type of a friction and tension, very tense type of a discussion to the extent of, blaming one another, finding faults with each other, really and expressing their hurt and pain in very destructive ways, and ultimately really not listening to one another. And so as a result, the relationship has gotten worse, even though they have attempted at repairing the relationship. Every time they have come together to address the issue, not knowing what to say, what not to say, they have ended up hurting one another even more. And at one point of time, even the son invited the parents to go visit with his therapist, kind of have a family session, in order to explain to them where his pain comes from. And again, because of the complexity and very difficult nature of dealing with the borderline personality characteristics and traits, they ended up really more resentful, even though with the presence of the therapist trying to figure out the depth of their pain, it really didn't lead anywhere favorable. So as a result, more or less they've become very hopeless and disappointed and disillusioned, and at a point where they don't understand what to do and they're giving up hope. And so she reached out to me asking, what should I do? Shall I, for instance, surprise my son? Just kind of go over there and, show up at his house, try to amend the relationship. So, and that's important. But I would like to bring up here a few concepts. Number one, our desire of repair may be too codependent on each other. So in this case, when you regardless of the position within the family, whether it's a mother or a father or a son or a daughter, siblings, whoever it is, when one person tries to convince more or less the other person to change their behavior because they believe that if the other person changed their behavior, their suffering could be lessened, then you actually end up at times exacerbating the problem and leading to more injury. Now, it is a very difficult situation where if a person who is quite suffering from a lack of attention, relationship, closeness, intimacy, they are left with nothing but some kind of a distance and silence from their partner. That is painful as well, but then what would you do? Would you just put up with the silence? Would you put up with the distance and leave it be with some kind of a imaginary hope of improvement? Maybe time heals everything, or kind of ignoring the issues and over time kind of getting back on track? Or would you really go at it and try to invest a lot more energy, a lot more time to fix the problem, to change the situation? So here my answer was that first of all, yes, at times what we have to do is really kind of honor that request. So if you and your family member, you're kind of in that situation, and let's say you are the one who is more or less being shunned by your family member, and your family member has borderline personality traits, characteristics, or disorder, then that's their wish. They have ended up coming to this point where they believe that further digging and intensity of the relationship is actually more harmful than helpful. So they have come to somehow a protective phase, a protective state and position in their psyche, in their life, which we also call harm reduction. So they're doing really harm reduction. They're thinking, I have tried it many times. I've tried to get along to make my needs obvious and communicate what I need, but it is not working. And every time I have tried, it is actually getting worse. So let me just do some harm reduction and really kind of keep a peaceful distance. It's better we don't see each other and really not have these intense ups and downs and the strife and conflict and friction and fights, more or less the quarrels with each other, than actually being together, spending time together with the hope of having some good time. Because really the good times become so elusive and far and few in between. They are hardly there. Once in a while there is some kind of intense good relationship, closeness, which is, by the way, characteristic with borderline personality and people in relationships with borderline personality disorder, where you have a lot of intense highs and a lot of intense lows. Kind of is continuous back and forth. The distancing and coming close together, distancing and coming close together. And ultimately, a person decides, you know what, I can't deal with it anymore. So it's better to have a reliable, consistent, persistent type of a distance that would just teach me how to just deal with that instead of going to the ups and downs of the intense experiences. What I can do is have a very leveled type of, if you will, manageable pain that is only about one thing, which is the distant relationship. So if a person has come to that point and they have decided that, and they are exercising that choice, so they're letting their family members know that, listen, it's better we just don't talk. Let's just stay away from each other. By all means, you can respect that. Even if it is difficult, it's not going to kill you. And basically, as a means of harm reduction, it might not be bad at all. What the people in the relationship can do, there's few things. I'm not saying this without any disregard and without empathy for the pain that people are experiencing, because I myself have experienced that as well with some family members. I'm not foreign to this. And so I can speak from first-hand experience that when this type of a disconnection happens, you can engage in certain coping skills. Number one, knowing that at least your loved one is in a peaceful state. Even though they're distant, they are okay, at least, if not happy, with having to bear that pain of distance and yet take care of themselves. So, if that's what they're choosing, if that's what's good for them, then, and you as a family member, you can bring yourself to accept that, in terms of maybe it's okay for you to not get what you want, which is that closeness to your family member, in order for them to get what they want, which is that peacefulness in their life. In this particular example, when the mother asked me, what shall I do with this? Shall I push forward? And my recommendation was no, don't push forward. Accept your son's decision. And again, you want closeness, he doesn't want closeness. Now, for many, many years, you were the parent present in his life, and you wanted certain things and you got those. And that really goes back to the corner and the center piece of the relationship, which the son had brought up in the therapy sessions that he had. Many, many times he had tried to express his feelings, emotions, and he was not heard. He was shut down. He was more or less ignored, and he couldn't really convey his pain and his needs and his intense experience to the parents. So for many years he didn't get what he needed and what he wanted. The parents did. It was more like they felt that they fulfilled their roles. They directed the life of the son. They were involved, and now the parents, again, just like they actually were good parents. At least they believe they were good parents, and I'm sure there is a great truth to that they have tried their best and are good parents. So in this case too, they can continue being a good parent in really taking on the burden and pain of the distance and telling themselves, well, if that's what my son needs, then why should I not respect that? Why should I not give him what he needs? Okay, even at the cost of me not getting what I need. Isn't that more or less some of the at least teachings that we learn about good parenting, or even love? A lot of times that brings me really to the discussion of the love. A lot of times people use the word and terminology of love him or her or this or that, and what they really mean is not love, they mean want. They want somebody, but they don't necessarily love that somebody. And the difference being that if they loved a person, they would be willing to do what's best for that person not themselves. But if they want someone, then the roles are reversed, or these needs or wishes are reversed. So people who want things, they're doing things, or the people who want other people in their lives, they are quite selfish. They are investing their time and energy only because of their own want and need, regardless of their partner's wants and needs, regardless of what's good for their partners, because their focus is only on their own needs and experiences and what's good for them. So there's a big difference in here. And parent love, too, a lot of times is defined by that, right? In terms of the ability, the capacity to really set that role, be the role model, and set that example in allowing some kind of a painful experience to be carried by the parent in order for the child to have his or her own experience, develop strength, grow out of that particularly painful situation or phase, and later on realize that, oh, my parents actually were there for me by carrying that burden that I could not carry for myself. So that was my recommendation to that lady, and that was an example of sometimes, unfortunately, what needs to be done. And the key component here is patience. Again, another coping mechanism is not only reminding yourself that actually you're doing a good thing by taking that burden of distance and being able to respect the other person's wish, but also allowing yourself to really exercise patience, reminding yourself that, the only constant in the world is change itself. Nothing else is constant. Everything changes. So it's inevitable for that son or daughter or family member to actually develop a different experience and perspective down the road in their lives, especially if we respect their wish. If that, and that's the other part of my recommendation to this mother was that if you do choose to respect his wish, your son's wish, and just kind of put up with the distance and not push for more closeness, you don't want to convey it in a way that it is putting more shame, embarrassment, guilt, and other painful experiences on your son. So you don't want to really embarrass him, kind of rub it in his face and tell him, listen, I'm willing to suffer through this, and this is so painful, and I can't believe that I have to do this, or you're putting me through this and that, but I'm willing to do it for you. Because that just blames the son even more. It exacerbates really the imbalance of the more or less responsibility of the son taking care of the feelings and emotions of the mother or the parents. So it has to be done with finesse, with a level of caring that is truly deep and leveled and secure and grounded. So if you as a family member, you are willing to put up with that distance, with that wish of your family member to just stay away for now, you want to convey it in a way that sends the right message. So and the right message would be sending a message of acknowledgement, validation, and acceptance without ifs and buts and anything. So just let them know, that's fine. Now that I understand that this works for you and you wish to have distance from me and to me, and this is your solution for now, I'm willing to do that. It's not easy for me, and I don't want to put the burden on you. It's not your burden, it's my burden. I do care about you, and I do find this a painful experience. It's not an easy experience. And regardless, I'm willing to respect your wish and validate you, acknowledge your need to stay away. And as long as you believe that is necessary. If you change your mind down the road, I'm there for you. I'm there for the relationship. And if there is something that needs to be done for me to, or for you, for both of us to be able to reach that level, I'm willing to hear. I'm willing to listen, and put the energy and effort to get there. And that's it. You just leave it there, and really allow the individual who is really done with these ups and downs and the intensity of the relationship, and they want to have some peacefulness, to kind of absorb that, see how is it, how is life with this new scenario that I have imagined. Is it better? Is it worse? Do I miss anything about my mother, about my father? And then kind of digest that message they have gotten from you in terms of, wow, I heard my mom or my dad just kind of really acknowledge what I need, and it's very clear that it is not foreign to them that this must be painful for a family member not to be close to each other, because it's very clear, because it's actually painful to them too. They just are preferring one pain to the other. So they're preferring the pain of distance to the pain of intense ups and downs of the closeness. So they're very aware that this is not a pleasant experience for both parties. And yet, once they have created some stability and perhaps learned some coping skills, some new ways of dealing with this dynamics of borderline personality and their environment and their community and other relationships in life, then they may really start looking at their original relationship differently. So they may kind of come back and say, well, if I see myself stronger, if I see myself capable of overcoming that anxiety that exists, that at one time I was incapable of handling, that I was overwhelmed and really delivered to, but today I feel differently. I don't feel those weaknesses anymore. I don't feel this panic around the anxieties of the relationship, but I can handle criticism, I can handle distance, I can handle disagreements and threat of separation or rejection or abandonment or any of those anxiety-provoking issues. If I can handle it, then maybe I can also handle the relationship again with my mom or with my father or with my family member. So, and the last memory for them with that family member is a pleasant one. It's something that they have felt validated, accepted, and more or less, say, respected. They felt, okay, I needed something and I got it. That person was willing to give me that respect. So, and now I'm stronger. So let me give it a shot. Let me give it a try. And especially in this case, as the son is particularly going through therapy. I'm sorry. I have a little bit of a bad cough. So as this son is going through therapy, I'm very hopeful that for the son to ultimately, if he puts enough energy and effort in really overcoming this malady, that they ultimately come to the realization that yes, they can handle it and they can overcome this issue, and they can go back to establishing healthy relationship with their family member, especially in this case with their parents. And they may have conditions. They may, for instance, want to have the parents really exemplify evidence that they have gone through some kind of a transformation as well. That their acknowledgement is not empty-handed, that it is backed by some evidence that, for instance, they have gone through therapy, their behavior is different, their reactions are different, their responses and reflections are different. They are not, at least they don't seem to be hostile or adversarial anymore, and as a result, it's safer So ultimately the idea here is to feel safe around one another, to not have to walk on eggshells, not to have to deal with embarrassment and shame and guilt um, and kind of negative criticism. That all of that can come across as attacks on a person's integrity and esteem, self-esteem, and core values and core beliefs. So rather than feeling invalidated and devalued or rejected or as an outsider, so they can feel like I can be accepted no matter what, exactly the way I am. And there is no ifs and buts and discussions and arguments and any attempt at changing me. Ultimately that is the core ingredient of a safe relationship. If people can establish this with one another to the point that their communication is aligned with this intention. If the intention is, I'm here for you, yes, I may find some feedback for you, certain things we certainly disagree upon, because just we are two human beings with different varied options, opinions, and viewpoints, and sets of likes and dislikes that don't match each other, So particularly we probably will arrive at polar opposites, which will really strain and tax and test our sense of reality. Despite this test of our sense of reality, we are willing to accept one another just the way we are and get along with each other, compromise, remain in the same room, be less reactive to what we don't like as we observe them, as we see them. To give you an example, let's make it a little bit more tangible. If a person is loud, right? That's like a lot of times they link this to ethnicities. I remember when I was living in Europe, neighboring Italy, I was in connection with a lot of Italian families, and in fact, in movies, Hollywood has exacerbated and exaggerated these features where Italian families have come to be known as loud and boisterous and animated, where they're yelling and taking their hands up and kind of talking with their hands and with their facial expression, and a lot of times being almost rude or in your face, at the same time very loving, caring, lovely people, but again kind of having this very pronounced verbal, nonverbal posture, behavioral, body features. So if you have that, let's say your family is a mix of somebody with these features and someone else who has learned that, expression, emotional expression, especially using the body, is not good, is something unpleasant and something distasteful and unacceptable, like impolite, especially again, stereotypically I state these, with a caveat that not all Italian families are like that, or let's say Middle Eastern or Asian or African or whatever, white, you name all these colors, it doesn't matter. Human beings are human beings. Anyway, so despite all these diversities, I don't want to add to the stereotypical stigma that exists, but again, for the sake of this conversation, if you have someone who has not, kind of complied with the norm of high animation and high emotional expression, such as a lot of times we have within the Asian or Southeast Asian culture, where basically, lack of emotional facial expression is the norm and is the more or less the higher standard, is the better, if you will, the more advanced level of composure. So now you have these polar values, right? One person may be thinking that this highly animated self-expression is the best you can do, the best you can be. This is your best. That's how you are. as a human being, and you can just experience life and humanity at its best and highest. Now you have another person who thinks, well, the best and highest and the most noble level of being a human, expressing yourself as a human, is to be quiet, to be silent, to be composed, to be, more or less, in their way, respectful of the situation by being more attentive and listening rather than talking. Now you have these two polar opposites clashing with each other. Now, it's to be expected that these two people cannot really remain in the same room and conversation and relationship for long, because constantly their belief system, their belief system as well as their neurobiology, really, all their sensory experience that is leading to internal processing and responsive behaviors is in disarray. They're completely confused. On the one hand, there is a set of norms that they need to follow. On the other hand, there's something else in front of them that is sending off alarm signals that, danger. There is some danger around you. The person who is highly animated feels threatened by the quiet, silent presentation of the composed person, and vice versa. So they both are feeling threatened by each other because of that, again, core belief being highly active in the center of this relationship. And so now, if you have these individuals kind of in the relationship, whether they're partners, or at times again parent, children, siblings, or even strangers that come together and kind of happen to find each other for a moment in a certain relationship. Now you have to particularly come to agree to kind of disagree and become mindful of these particular differences and try to compromise to some extent. So, which is very, very difficult, and it cannot last too long. But over time, it is more or less what is necessary for a person to be able to do so. So, same thing with going back to the discussion of borderline personality characteristics. When we decide to basically take some distance from one another and ultimately take some time, we also have to work on developing some skills to overcome these types of sources, if you will, or manage, contain these types of sources of stimuli that piss us off, right? And ultimately learn how to deal with such extreme differences between family members. It's not easy. If we, however, care and at least care about ourselves and care about our families and family members, we all can learn those skills. We all can learn to live with diverse presentations. And ultimately, really, by focusing on the positive characteristics, on the common characteristics, on the pleasant characteristics that we find in each other, and not allowing our brain to veer off to kind of go on a tangent toward negative, to what we dislike. We have to constantly work on it, and it is possible. So going back to that example that I mentioned, that I said, well, have patience, let the family member take their time, and if they're back on track and they have gotten this validation from you that it's okay to take your time off, to have the distance, and then they come back and make certain conditions that, in your response to me, even though you may not like what you see in me, what I would appreciate is some kind of a positive acknowledgement, some kind of a supportive, basically. It needs to be supportive in nature, pleasant and validating. So An example would be something like, let's say, after a couple of years, for this mother and son being separate, um, under certain circumstances and conditions, they could find each other back in the same room with the acknowledgement that, why don't we both try to focus on the positive sides? We have talked about negativity, we have talked about what has pained us and hurt us enough, and really just kind of take the journey from an intentionally positive perspective, even if we wanted to talk about certain things that we don't like or that we have been aggravated and felt assaulted even or attacked about. Still, we can do it in a manner of kind of less vengeful and more forgiving, to a point where we can create some kind of a space for understanding that I know that I must have hurt you in the past. Some of my actions must have hurt you in the past. And that needs to be reciprocal. It cannot be one-sided and lopsided. Can't always be like, let's say the son comes back and says, well, as long as you as a mother or as a father acknowledge how much you have pained me and hurt me, and that's it, that's the end of it, and you can take that blame forever and become more or less the perpetrator, kind of take on that role of being the bad guy in my life, and I can target you as a source of all my problems, then yeah, that's a acceptable relationship. That can't work. It's not going to work because, again, we're talking about an unbalanced, lopsided type of a relationship where there is too much burden put on the one end instead of distributed across. So it won't work, and to a point where, because then we are victimizing a person or a couple of people, in this case the parents, and basically make their victimization and a perpetual, infinite acceptance of guilt, shame, and blame a condition of this relationship, which, by the way, is going to lead probably most likely to further opportunity for emotional and perhaps other types of abuse. So we don't want that, an imbalanced relationship. So ultimately what we want to acknowledge here is that, as part of our nature, being human, we inadvertently and inevitably hurt one another. And the pain and the hurt and the kind of the injury to the relationship most of the time is from the situation itself, in this kind of stemming from the reality of just being diverse, as I talked about, that a lot of times we are polar, we are polar opposites from one another. We're just like I mentioned with that, two people, one being highly animated, the other one being very conservative, composed, and unexpressive. So these features of diversity, of diverse presentations and likes and dislikes themselves lead to injury, lead to invalidation of our own core philosophies and core belief system. So therefore, if we can accept and understand that it's more the reality of diversity, the reality of the situation that is hurtful more than the person on the other end of on the other side of the table, so to say, or on the other side of that relationship. So it's not the person trying to hurt me, it's the situation that's hurting me. It's the situation of having to deal with polar opposites, with these completely disparate and incompatible sets of likes and dislikes and preferences that is actually leading to my pain. And in fact, another layer to that is it's not even that, the different sets of incompatible values, but what I tell myself about it that is actually hurting me. So my own judgments, more or less. So let's say someone who is facially unexpressive would look at someone who is animated, and internally they're telling themselves, what a jerk, for instance. this is not how you act in a social setting. You're too loud, too impolite, and this is awful. This is kind of really impetuous and petrifying. That's just unacceptable, and so rude and disrespectful. That self-talk, that inner language that they have with themselves, which is the judgment of the situation, is really the pain, is the source of the pain. And vice versa. The one who is animated, thinking this guy who is quiet and the corner of the room and doesn't express their feelings and is not, engaging with me, must have negative view of me. And who do they think they are? They think they're better than me, just putting themselves in that corner and think they can compose themselves and not express their feelings. What are they, a robot? And they're not human beings. So they kind of have this automatic inner reflection which includes a lot of judgment about this other person and themselves, that leads to the pain. So if we could work on those judgments and kind of set them aside, then we would have less pain, honestly. And again, the level of compromise and acceptance, if two people can come to openly express their intention of care, and of the differences, and of the possibility of injury and hurt, and acknowledge those realities, that we, by nature, we are bound to piss each other off to some extent. And there are two choices we have. One is to kind of ignore this reality and go in our cocoons and in our corners and just say, no, I'm too anxious to deal with this acceptance of diversity and letting go of my own judgments. And I don't want to accept this other person with their other values, with this, completely opposite values of me. And then we end up being a lot more isolated, distant to one another, more entrenched in our own core belief system, and not open enough to kind of step out of our comfort zone into the discomfort zone and really experience a richer life. But the other choice being that we would say, yeah, it's difficult. It is, not as comfortable. I have to step out of my comfort zone, and I have to really work. I got to work on this relationship. Take the heat, take the intensity, knowing that ultimately this is for the better good for both of us and for the better, benefit of both people in the relationship. It is in our best benefit, and ultimately, I'm willing to deal with this reality and with this diversity, suspend my judgment, focus more intentionally, focus and direct my mental resources toward the positive things that are happening here. A lot of commonality that is going on here. The fact that we still, are here in the same room. We care about each other. We could have been doing other things, completely other things. So, but we have put more or less a priority on this relationship if we are still in the same room with one another. And again, exercise forgiveness. Ultimately, it is about exercising forgiveness and letting go and reducing our judgment. Now, what I can understand is very difficult about this is this anxiety that may come up out of a self-protection, like vulnerability. Everybody may be theoretically willing to follow these directions that I gave, but ultimately, in the heat of the moment, feel intensely vulnerable and feel like, I can't protect myself if the other person can't handle themselves. If I'm bringing down my guards and become kind of, so to say, psychologically naked and vulnerable in front of this other person, and then this other person doesn't know how to handle their own anxiety, their own judgment, so they may take a jab at me, again, intentionally or unintentionally. They may say something judgmental, then that may get to my core sense of self-esteem and confidence. Then what I'm going to do? I'm too hurt at that time. Therefore, it's better to keep my guard off. guard up. So that a lot of times comes up, which really complicates the situation even more, and and it's not easy, and that's why this whole thing takes practice. We can't run it perfectly the first time, and by practice we really mean this almost, if you will, even jotting down certain steps that you need to take, like writing it on a piece of paper, and kind of keeping to the script, if you will. It's as difficult as, let's say, acting. A lot of people who have to act, they write the script, they reread it over and over again. They have reminders, they have clues. They have to reshoot and retake that scene over and over again before they can perfectly present themselves. And at times they may never get there to perfectly enact that scene. So post-production, basically, videographer comes in and pastes this scene together, and then we look at the movie and think everything went perfectly. So in these types of relationships too, at times we just have to live with the imperfections, the imperfect situations of trying to trying to repair the relationship. It doesn't go perfectly. We still improve our skills, accept the imperfections, and then patching these pieces, these seams of having attempted the best we could together for the sake of the total life experience with each other, and kind of regard the totality of the experience as a good script, as a good movie, as a good life experience with one another, and kind of come to terms with that. It's not perfect, but it's not too bad either. You know, we have made it so far, and we have developed certain strengths within ourselves, and it's going to get better from here too. We finally are about 5:55 right now, so we went about 45 to 50 minutes straight talking about this, just one particular example. Let me check if we have any other types of questions. No, we don't have any questions. So I hope this was informational and informative for you in terms of borderline personality, family members, how to deal with them, specifically in the cases where one family member actually wants to stay away from the others. In the next week, we will continue with these types of discussions and presentations. If you do have any questions specifically about your family members, just like this lady who sent me the information, I'd be happy to answer those. Feel free to email. You can post it in the social media as you're experiencing this, watching this video, or you can email me at basically, I would say, info@therapycable.com. I think that's the best email to reach me at, info@therapycable.com. I'd be happy to answer your questions. And also, I encourage you to watch our other videos on Therapy Cable, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. We have all kinds of videos related to personality disorders, addiction, sexuality, human relationships. Make sure you visit YouTube, check out Therapy Cable, and also therapycable.com. Thank you very much for watching. Until next week, Thursday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.